do in this guidance document is to reflect the outcome of the judgment on one side, and then to add, let's say, further details on how to clarify the justifications which member states have to provide when they grant emergency authorizations, and also do some improvements in the system, which is an electronic system where member states have to submit the emergency authorizations. So that is ongoing, the update of this guidance document. What we did it in the past, and we will continue to do that, is to monitor the emergency authorizations which are granted. And if we have, let's say, any concern, we will mandate EFSA to look at it. And if there is no justification provided, or there's no justification to grant these emergency authorizations, we will take decisions to tell member states not to repeat these emergency authorizations. So that is something we did in the past, and we will continue to do so. And as a third thing, we have mandated EFSA to develop specific protocols to be able to assess the justifications which member states are giving for granting this emergency authorization. So this is work which is ongoing. EFSA is working on it, and we will see the results in the next year, if I am not mistaken. So that's for emergency authorizations. So I move then to other actions which are related to the risk assessment to pollinators. And here, I mean, just before going into the detail of what happened lately, maybe a little bit of a background. Probably you are all aware, but I just want to repeat. So at the moment, the status quo is still a guidance document of 2002 on terrestrial ecotoxicology, which also covers bees. There was a guidance document from EFSA in 2013, which was never endorsed by the member states in the standing committee, despite several efforts over several years. And because of that, we had mandated in 2019 EFSA to review this guidance document of 2013 and to take into account all the new science which have been, let's say, produced during these years. So this new guidance document has now been adopted by EFSA in May this year. And if I am not mistaken, there will be a detailed presentation of EFSA in the next session. So I refer you to that for the content. But of course, now we need to see what we do with this published new EFSA bee guidance document. And the normal, let's say, procedure is to endorse these documents by the Standing Committee on Plants, Animals, Food and Feed. In this case, it's a bit more complicated process, because before endorsement, we need to update 3 implementing regulations, which are the one on the uniform principles for the evaluation and authorization of plant protection products, and 2 implementing regulations concerning data requirements for active substances and for plant protection products. So and only after these 3 implementing regulations have been updated, we will be in condition to endorse the guidance document at the Standing Committee. So we have already started discussing with the Standing Committee on, let's say, the endorsement and the need to update these 3 implementing regulations. We have advanced drafts, let's say, which we will initiate discussions on the basis of these concrete drafts with member states pretty soon. Just for you to know, apologies, I should put this on mute. It is on mute. So where was I? Yes, discussions at the Standing Committee will be initiated in the next weeks on the basis of a first draft. And once the texts are mature, I mean, just for you to know, they will be, of course, voted at the Standing Committee. But before voting, there will be a feedback mechanism. So stakeholders will be consulted. There will be a public consultation. And after the vote, there is also scrutiny of the Council and the Parliament. So they will also have a say there. yeah, and after all this process, we will endorse the guidance document. And what we expect is that we will finalize the whole process next year. So before end of the year, we will have the implementing regulations in place and the guidance document adopted. So what about non-bee pollinators? I mean, I forgot to mention the guidance document of EFSA. EFSA will detail that, but one important change is that they expand from Apis mellifera, honeybee, to bamboo species and to solitary bees. And that's also one of the reasons we need to make these changes to the implementing regulations. So, but what about non-bee pollinators? So in general, they're covered by the risk assessment for non-target arthropods. You may be aware that actually for pesticide risk assessment, we ask for quite a number of data on non-target arthropods, actually more than in other jurisdictions. So there is a good coverage for that. But I mean, we are aware, and that's the intention, that this guidance document, which is covering non-target arthropods, also needs an update. It had been identified as a priority by member states, understanding committee. So we are preparing already a mandate to EFSA to update the guidance and the risk assessment for non-target arthropods. EFSA has already started over the last years actually to do some preparatory work. So this will be a smooth process because they are preparing, but it will also not be a very short process. It will be a complex one. So it will take minimum 2 years until we have our new guidance on non-target arthropods. But work is ongoing. And then another action, I mean, related to the risk assessment was the work plan for additional test protocols. So just to give a bit of a background, and it's also a link to the new guidance document of EFSA. We need to have standardized test protocols to be able to test the pesticides, and these protocols need to be standardized and validated in order to give robust results. And for some species, they're not yet there. So that's why there is this work plan which lists the missing, let's say, protocols, which also lists who is developing which protocol and also who is taking the responsibility to then follow this up for the OECD validation, because it needs to be ring tested, there needs to be some paperwork which needs to be submitted to OECD, etc. So the work plan is, let's say, agreeing on who is that, who is doing what, and it's been discussed at the standing committee. Permanently, it will be updated so that we can include the progress and monitor how the work is going. And of course, if other species need to be added, for instance, because of the terrestrial guidance document for non-target arthropods, we could add that to the work plan. So it's a sort of living document in order to track progress and identify needs. Then another action was on unacceptable coformulants. I don't know if you are aware, we have in the EU a list of unacceptable coformulants in the regulation for plant protection products. And we have now a new implementing regulation of this year, actually, which sets out, let's say, detailed rules so that additional substances can be added to this list of unacceptable coformulants. So this is done and completed, the action. But I mean, we are going also beyond. We are doing more work on coformulants. There have been 2 workshops this year in order to increase transparency and harmonization, because coformulants is done by member states at the authorization phase for plant protection products. So here we are continuing the work with member states, and you can find the detailed information on the link which I provided. And now moving to biocides, which is not section 6, but section 9 of the actions. I am pleased to tell you that very recently, a guidance document, a new guidance document to assess the risk to bees and other pollinators from the use of biocides was developed by ECHA, and it was endorsed last week by the competent authorities of biocides. So that's something new. And with that, I think that's the last slide. I provide you a link where you can find more information. Thank you very much.
So thank you very much for your overview. We are coming now to a very crucial element. It's the point of view from agriculture and rural developments side. And I also want to address the European Citizens Initiative that was named Save Bees and Farmers. And agriculture and farmers were, or their future, were the justification for the refusal of the regulation for the reduction of pesticides. So I want to give the floor now to Mrs. Gaëlle Marion. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you very much for the invitation to this interesting and important event. So I'm very happy to be with you. And as was mentioned, many factors influence the life of or the decline of pollinators, of wild pollinators. But clearly, agriculture is a part of the issue. But of course, having certain negative impacts through especially the use of pesticides, but also because agriculture can offer favorable conditions to pollinators. So agriculture is also part of the solution. And also we have to keep in mind that pollinators are important also for agriculture. So it's keeping pollinators is of course important as well for agriculture. So, so I think the numbering is not exactly right if we compare to the actions. The actions related to agriculture are part of Action 5, and so these are the 4 sub-actions of Action 5 in the action plan of the new deal for pollinators. The first action is mainly about the uptake of measures and support measures, especially under the Common Agricultural Policy, but also possibly under other programs. So how we're going to work with member states to encourage the planning of measures, interventions, which can be interesting for pollinators, which are well designed so that the uptake by farmers can be efficient. And so that's the first action. Also some reflections on how we can do better under our policies to make sure that agricultural activity is more synergetical with the protection of pollinators. The second action is about the sharing of good practices, because as you may know, under the CAP, member states have a lot of leeway to design in a way or another their interventions in agriculture. And there are very good examples, and I will show a few in a moment. There are very good examples, and it's important to share these examples to inspire from one territory to another what is done. And not all, of course, is transferable. Not all experiences exactly can be done in exactly the same way, but that's interesting to exchange experience. In these exchanges, there is particular attention to innovative ways to implement measures like result-based payments, as we call them, or collective measures. But I will say a little bit more in a moment. A third action is about enhancing the capacity of farm advisory services for pollinators and communication activities. There, it's more at the level of the territories of the farms, how to inform farmers of what is possibly harmful for pollinators and what is not harmful, or even possibly as good to protect pollinators. And the fourth sub-action is the development of an indicator for pollinator, which will possibly then be used under the Common Agricultural policy to better monitor the link between agriculture and pollinators. And this indicator is part of the nature restoration law. So in principle, this will be followed up once the law is adopted. Or maybe I don't press the right one. Yes, the right one. Yes. Do you want to do? Well.
I mean, before it was working, so I don't know.
Well,
Okay.
it has to be in presentation mode, I think.
Yeah, I don't know why. Like every time that I put it in presentation mode, it gets out of the of the document on the screen. So that's why I kept it like this. I'm sorry for this.
No.
On the first sub-action under Action 5, so about the uptake of interventions and support to farmers, which can be positive for to stop the decline of pollinators. First, to mention that the new CAP framework has clearly increased its ambition for environment and climate. The whole framework is more demanding for farmers, with an enhanced conditionality, but also with more funds to be dedicated to environmental and climate objectives. So eco schemes now under the first pillar, but still the necessity to dedicate at least 35% of the rural development instruments for environmental and climate objectives. So under this framework, there is already more that is done compared to the previous CAP. But we know that there are still continued efforts to be done. Some interventions we can find in both eco schemes or agro-environmental management, and which are expected to produce positive impacts on pollinators. Organic farming, there is support for conversion to organic farming, also for maintenance, but the conversion is surely the most important in terms of impact. The maintenance and development of landscape features, this is very important. Under the conditionality already, there is strong attention to the protection of landscape features. And then there are quite a lot of interventions which are planned to protect these hedges, trees in lines, or other landscape elements, which are, of course, very important for pollinators. And of course, there's a third package of interventions, stream of actions, is to reduce the use and risk of pesticides. So there also, member states have planned interventions to compensate farmers when they switch to a system with a non-use of pesticide or a strong decrease in the use of pesticides, and when they will use precision technologies or integrated pest management practices. With this, next slide, please. So to look a little bit more into these examples, because they are important to illustrate that things are happening already. So certain interventions target very specifically pollinators. So that happens in Spain, but also some agri-environment management commitments, which are designed to create biodiversity relevant coverage or improving the pollinator potential of bees, the management of beekeeping units for the purpose of pollination, the promotion of natural pollinators, etc. Another thing to mention is whole farm systems approach, like agroforestry or agroecology, which can also be very favorable to protection of biodiversity in general. And there are also under the CAP payments for Natura 2000 in Natura 2000 areas. These are not often mentioned, but they are important. They support farmers who are in Natura 2000 areas and have to respect a number of obligations and requirements which have been agreed under the priority action framework. And there they can get compensation for their efforts. The next slide. I hope, Mr. Haider, you will find it particularly interesting, because my colleagues dig the examples from Austria, apparently indeed making specific efforts for environment and biodiversity through their CAP measures. under so support for creating biodiversity of flowering areas covering up to 7% of arable land or grassland of farmers. The reseed of biodiversity area with very rich species, regional seed mixtures with minimum 30 species. So this kind of examples. So how farmers can be incentivized and compensated for creating meadows with more species that can be friendly for pollinators. And other areas, buffer strips with certain types of flowers and species, these kinds of things. I will let you all read these examples, but these show that there are a lot of things happening already on the spot, and maybe it's time for the next slide. And so it's important that we also support, and that's what we are doing, support the exchange of these good practices. And among the sharing of good practices, we will try to put particular focus on result-based payments and collective measures, which are also happening. So result-based payments would be payments to farmers which are based really solely on the results. How many species in a given meadow, or how many species finally are present in a given buffer strips, these kind of things. While collective measures means measures which are implemented by a group of farmers, and that's particularly interesting because, of course, connectivity between the different areas for pollinators is very relevant. Individual actions by farmers is already good, of course, but when they can be designed at landscape level, they have an even better effect. So there are examples of these types of relatively innovative interventions. They are more challenging from implementation point of view. So administrative constraints are still there. So they're a bit more complex, but there are really good examples, and we'll continue to trigger example of exchanges of practices on these innovative kind of supports. Next slide, please. So finally, and perhaps most operationally, the third action is about enhancing capacity of advisory services, and through that there will be a workshop organized in June next year on pollinator conservation in agriculture, which will involve not just advisors but also researchers, the managing authorities of the programs, but also farmers and other actors, in a way to really see what can be improved in the advisory services, what are the needs, which good practice can already be exchanged in this area. So unfortunately, I think the date is not yet fixed. So we'll come back to that when the date is fixed, but you can already note this. And finally, on the fourth action, it's as it's an indicator that is part of the nature restoration law. Once the law will be approved, work will be kicked off to prepare this new indicator. There are already some preparatory work being conducted with our colleagues from DG Environment. Happy to.
Thank you very much for your presentation, and many thanks to all of our speakers for the informative statements and insights in the issue. We have also other EU institutions present, either online or here in the room. And I want to ask if there is any feedback of the representatives of the Court of Auditors, the Committee of the Regions, or from the Economic and Social Committee. Who wants to take the floor? Yeah, you have.
No, it's support. Michaela from the Court of Auditor. It's following us online.
So.
Good morning.
But we cannot hear her. So
we cannot hear you yet.
Oh, let's try to.
Mrs. Vakarasu. But we try.
I don't know if it's getting.
Okay, so before we.
So
I want to give, as
I'm
long
going
as
to
we
try
haven't
to check.
solved the technical problem, then I want to pass the floor to.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. My name is Stojan Čukanov. I'm representing the European Economic and Social Committee. And because you have some technical issues, I'm taking the opportunity to take the floor. I hope you don't mind, right? Okay, so I don't know how familiar you are, what is the European Economic and Social Committee, but actually we are representing the organized civil society, and that's the platform that actually the civil society organization can express their vision about the proposal coming from the Commission and going to the Parliament. So we have 3 groups in our committee representing the employees, which is mostly the large organization from different stakeholders in this field, banks, industrials, etc. We have also second group, which is the employees, which is the trade unions organization, basically, from all member states. And we have the third group, to which I belong, that we represent the civil society organization, and I'm representing the agricultural sector of Bulgaria, from where I'm coming, and I'm a farmer myself. And yeah, so you have a straight input from the different subjects that are concerning farmers. What is the relation in between the two? And because a lot has been said by the representatives of the Commission, that's why I'm going a little bit more in the details that are coming from the field. And yes, I think education, it's very, very important, and how to spread the knowledge in between the farmers, because sometimes we are just not really aware what we're doing, and then we're just suffering the results. To give you a good example, because Madame Marion mentioned Bulgaria just in her presentation, but that's a good example how under the new strategic plan that is actually, we are applying the new strategic plan for the first year, and we are deriving data from what was the implementation from the new strategic plan for the first time this year in the autumn. Now we just got the data from the side of the European Commission, but we had this data on the member states level, especially in Bulgaria. So once the opportunity was given to the farmers through this new intervention, actually, to save the wild pollinators, and it's interesting because the interest was surpassing 400% the budget that was dedicated. For example, in comparison, the budget for the infrastructure, the elements of the landscape, ecologically dedicated elements of the landscape, that's how we call these eco schemes in Bulgaria, the demand for the budget was only 20%. So that's just to illustrate how important it is to have a really good like a campaign before we introduce a scheme, so it's understandable on the farm level. And then the people are interested, because we are looking for this not as much as a compensation, but much more as incentives, which is our, let's say, guideline and proposal for eventually the next CAP post 2027. This is just one bullet point. Another point is that, as you probably know, we are external border of the European Union. So it's hard to compete with the farmers on the other side of the border that they are not only using the PPPs that are banned in the European Union, but sometimes they are importing PPPs from the European Union that we cannot use in our farms, but they are using over there. So it's a matter of competitiveness, because by using those products for plant protection, they are more competitive. And we have a very common climate circumstances, because especially the countries on the south, we are facing a lot of problems and a lot of invasive species that are coming because of the climate change. So all of this is related, and we have to really listen to the voice of the organized civil society, because we are representing those people that are facing all these troubles and problems. We cannot just eliminate all the pesticides, believe me or not. It's not my favorite type of treatment, but it's necessary. We cannot close the pharmacies here in Brussels, right? Because it's just important. And that's what the pesticides are for our production. But we can kind of facilitate the life and the work of the farmers through more education and more comprehensive eco schemes that are useful for everyone. And just to finish with this, here is the key role of the European Economic and Social Committee, because we can spread all this legislative process through our large network of different organizations, because we are all representing different organizations. And when I go back to Bulgaria in my own agricultural organization, we are trying to organize seminars and to explain what the Brussels is thinking and where the Brussels is going with this or that legislative act. And that's very important. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your intervention, and especially for your personal view as a farmer and your perspective in all these topics. We have another try for Madam Bazarazu, if I spell it right.
Yes.
Yeah, we can have another try, but I'm not sure you can hear me. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Ah, excellent, excellent. Played a little bit around with Zoom, and it seemed it worked. So good morning, everyone from Luxembourg. Thank you very much for your invitation to this panel on the revised EU Pollinators Initiative. I'm sorry that I couldn't make it in person. So I am Mihaela Văcărașu. I am a senior auditor here at the European Court of Auditors, and I also led an audit on the Commission action to protect wild pollinators in the EU in 2020. So I'm here to say a few words about that particular audit, and also what happened after that. So our audit focused on the EU Pollinators Initiative, so the 2018 Pollinators Initiative. At that time, it was being implemented by the Commission. And the key EU policies that address the main threats to pollinators, namely biodiversity conservation measures, So EU Biodiversity Strategy, Habitats Directive, LIFE program, the Common Agricultural Policy, and the pesticides legislation. Our audit identified gaps in all these three key policies and considered that the Pollinators Initiative does not have the tools and mechanisms to address them. So we recommended the Commission to improve the governance and control mechanisms on the Pollinators Initiative, but also to assess the need to enlarge the scope of the Pollinators Initiative. We also recommended to better integrate measures for wild pollinators in biodiversity conservation measures, but also in the Common Agricultural Policy. And last but not least, to improve the protection of wild pollinators in the pesticides risk assessment process. So most of these recommendations had as deadline 2023. So we are currently in the process of reviewing if the Commission took adequate and timely corrective action. So I cannot say too much about that process because it is ongoing. But what I can say is that since the publication of our report, the Commission indeed has taken a number of measures in all these areas that we, in which we recommended the action to be taken. So, of course, the first EU Pollinators Initiative was reviewed in 2021, and then it was revised in 2023. Its scope has also been extended because we've noticed that climate change, biocides, light pollution are now mentioned also in the initiative. Also, the Commission put forward the proposal for a nature restoration law, which includes for the first time a target to reverse the decline of pollinators population by 2030. We also, in the area of the Common Agricultural Policy, noticed that a study on the integration of pollinator conservation into the Common Agricultural Policy was published in 2021. So it was a study that looked at what measures were already integrated in the rural development programs by the member states so that they can be used as lessons learned for the new programming period. So for member states to include such actions also in the CAP strategic plans for 2023-2027. We noticed also the publication of a guide for farmers and the Common Agricultural Policy Managing Authorities for pollinator-friendly farming. And what concerns the pesticides policy, the Commission published the proposal to revise, of course, the Sustainable Use Directive, but we know that that didn't lead to much change. But what we can note is that the EFSA did revise the guidance document, which is used to assess the risk of pesticides on bees in May 2023. But we still note that the guidance is not applicable when active substances are approved on the EU market. And as already mentioned by the colleague from DJ Sante, I want to mention again this important step that was the judgment of the European Court of Justice from January 2023, which stated that member states can no longer grant emergency authorizations for neonicotinoids that were banned for outdoor use. Because in our report, we were pointing towards the increasing use of emergency authorizations for neonicotinoids in the member states after the partial ban, but also after the full ban for outdoor use in 2018. As you can see, many things have changed since 2020. Now, we cannot say at this point whether all these actions were sufficient to address all the weaknesses that we highlighted in our report. But what I can say is that the result of our follow-up will be available in the third quarter of 2024, embedded in the annual report of the European Court of Auditors. Now, if you're interested in finding more about the work that we have conducted in 2020, but also on the recommendations that we issued to the Commission, I will be happy to take your questions in the Q&A session. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Here in the room, the people attending had problems with understanding you because the speakers did not work, but it works with a headphone. So with a headphone, it would have worked, but this is all recorded and you have the opportunity to hear what the point of view from the European Court of Auditors is. It was a look back on the audit from 2020 about the follow-up and the developments, and I think it's worth to hear it if you look online or you watch online the recording of the statement. I now want to ask if there is a feedback from the Committee of the Regions. Please.
Okay. Well, first of all, thank you very much for inviting us and for organizing this. My name is Marta Manzanet Canovas. I'm Policy Officer of the ENVE Commission of the European Committee of the Regions. And sorry, the European Committee of the Regions is the voice of the cities and regions in the European Union. It is a consultative advisory body to the European Union and gathers more than 600 local and regional authorities from the 27 member states. We organize meetings, plenaries, debates to discuss about the priorities of the political priorities of the European Union, but then also about the local and regional matters. And then we adopt opinions on European Union legislation. So the main goal of these opinions is to provide feedback and to provide input to the EU institutions, especially to the European Commission, to the Parliament and to the Council, on the elements, policies and legislation that have elements that are relevant for local and regional authorities. Within this framework, with these opinions, we adopted one opinion on Pollinators initiative in January 2022. So the main goal of this opinion was to provide feedback or input to the revision of the Pollinators initiative that has been published this year. The rapporteur of the opinion was Frida Nilsson. She is a member of the City Council in Linköping in Sweden. And the opinion was finalized in January 2022, so it doesn't have elements that have been published now in the revised initiative. But the main points of the opinions were, I'm gonna explain a bit what were the main points of the opinion. First of all, we are with you that the pollinators are essential for the well-functioning of societies, nature, and that they play a key role in food systems and in maintaining biodiversity and landscapes. So in that, we all agree. And then also we welcome the positive direction taken by the Pollinators initiative when it was implemented in 2018, but then also we were really happy to see the guide from the European Commission on pollinator-friendly cities. We also support the conclusions of the report of the Court of Auditors. But of course, there was a bit of concern because even if all these actions were being taken, there was still a decline on pollinators. We are also hopeful because we checked that the IPBES Global Assessment Report on Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services said that it's not too late. So with our opinion, we wanted to highlight the possibilities and responsibilities of local and regional authorities in accelerating the implementation of the Pollinators initiative. Because as it was mentioned, cities and regions are diverse landscape with a wide range of flora and fauna. And also local governments have a direct impact in land use and then a green space management and conservation efforts. As a colleague from the Commission mentioned, for example, in the terms of light pollution, cities and regions are the almost not the only ones, but they can play a key role in reducing light pollution. So by implementing pollinator-friendly policies at local level, for example, reducing the use of pesticides, creating green corridors, establishing green gardens, cities and regions can enhance the habitats of the pollinators. Then also cities and regions offer an opportunity to implement tailored approaches. As I can see in the slide, local and regional authorities can implement action plans and can consider the specific challenges and opportunities of each area. And within these action plans, for example, they can include supporting monitoring programs designed for urban environments. And for this, it's really important to involve all the stakeholders and to foster collaboration within the research areas, farmers, citizens, local and regional authorities, associations. So because these kind of actions cannot be taken alone by just one actor. So collaboration is really relevant. And then finally, cities and regions can also act as communication hubs, raising awareness about the importance of pollinators, and then also education campaigns, communication campaigns in their cities and regions. So besides this, the Committee of the Regions, in the opinion, also called for legally binding targets for stop the decline of pollinators. And we asked for that in the nature restoration law. So then we were really happy to see in the original proposal of the nature restoration law that there was a binding target. Now we'll see what happens. But yeah, because restoration is a fundamental component for protecting pollinators, because they a restored area can provide ecosystem services. So we also call on the Commission to address the decline of pollinators internationally. So last year during the CBD COP15, we wanted to make a plea a bit to advocate for strong measures to protect pollinators. And that was reflected in the Global Biodiversity Framework in the Target 11, and then also as an indicator in the Target 12. And then finally, we are happy to see that the revised initiative of the Commission presents elements that we called for. And for example, it is highlighted that the European Committee of the Regions would be really important to promote regional engagement and collaboration. We offer our support to implement this revised initiative, and we are working on it. For example, we have a collection of best practices, not only on pollinators and Green Deal areas, but we are already gathering best practices on pollinators conservation, such as, for example, in Tallinn, there's a green corridor of 13 kilometers of green area that I had the pleasure to visit and see. And we want to call for more best practices, because at the end of the day, the action is what matters. And with these small actions, it's really easy to duplicate. Well, not really easy, but it can be easier. If you have seen that another city has implemented a project, then you can also do it. So yeah, that's my feedback. Thank you very much. Oh.
Thank you very much for your feedback, and it's now time for questions from the participants, and we have one question online already. And
it's Diane Spiteri. So it's from Diane Spiteri, who can unmute herself and speak and make her contribution.
Do we know the question so that we can raise it?
She-
Maybe if she
raised
can
her
hear
hand. Yeah.
can hear us, maybe you write it in the chat and I ask to the people present if there are some questions, please. In the back.
Okay, so I'm Constantin Dobrescu. I represent ROMAP, is the Federation of Romanian Beekeepers Association. And listening to the presentation from Madame Karin Nitstedt, I quote, "The Commission will continue to monitor emergency authorizations." So I find a bit worrying here two notions. One of them is continuation, and the second one is monitoring itself. So the context is that Romania, a member state, has granted emergency authorizations by derogation for 10 years in a row, in spite of the law, in spite of the guidance document, in spite of the ruling of European Court of Justice, in spite of the protest of the civil society. They are doing what they have been doing constantly. Now, if the Commission will continue to act as up to now, I see that we are hopeless as beekeepers. On the other hand, monitoring helps us in which way? Of course, it's important to monitor, to know the reality. But what comes afterwards? Yeah? So you tell us about the guidance document on emergency authorizations. The current the guidance document also provides certain things like an authorization, emergency authorization, should it be repeated in case there is not proper reason for that, and is not a proof that there is a research program in place having as a final target to find new ways of fighting all this, changing the situation. Yeah, let's say Romania has not done any such research in 10 years. Continuing will be actually the same. Shall we continue in the same way?
Okay, may I ask you to close?
Sure.
Are there any other questions? Because I would take up 3 and then give the floor to our speakers. And I see there are much more. And I have to tell you that we have to finish on at 1:30 sharp. So I start in the back and go to the front, please. And running out.
I have a question on invasive species. The Vespa velutina, Asian hornet, has been with us now for nearly 20 years. And as far as I know, in Europe, it's still only classified as being of concern. When on earth is Europe going to act to put in place a plan of control on this insect, which is causing damage not just to honeybee populations, but to the environment in general, other insects and pollinators?
Thank you. A third question, and we do another row. Who wants? Please, yeah.
Okay, my name is Ingrid Schmarantze. I'm representing the Austrian beekeeping associations. We beekeepers have a problem. It has come in the last time. It's very strange for me because protecting the wild pollinators, they started to kick out the beekeepers of the natural areas. And then we have commissioned investigations to look for the facts. And in the meantime, we know that honeybees are not in competition with wild pollinators. And I think it's still, the situation is still this, that we are not allowed to go into nature areas or protected areas. In many countries, they have problems, and the beekeepers still have a lot of problems because of the pesticides, of the climate change, and so on. And this is a problem which is created from different people, but the facts show us it's a problem of, it's not a real problem. It's only a matter of habitats, and of resources. Thank you. And therefore, it's necessary to look for that because beekeepers, they stop working, lots of them, because of all the problems they have in Europe. And lots of them start taking another job and reduce the beekeeping, especially the professionals. Thank you.
Okay. Who wants to answer? Please.
I can start with the questions from Romania on the emergency authorizations. Well, I think there was also a bit of a confusing with the word monitoring as I meant it, and how you may have understood it, because it has several meanings, but I will clarify. So we need to keep in mind that the emergency authorizations are full responsibility of the member states. Because you may remember the pesticide legislation has two steps. First one is active substance approval at member state level, and plant protection product authorization use is at member state level. First one at EU level, second at member state level. So it's full responsibility of the member states. So we have asked member states already years ago to notify these to us in a very transparent way because it's public. And what we do, and what I meant with monitoring, is that we keep a very careful eye on these. And if we see something which is suspicious or of concern, then we take action. So for emergency authorizations on neonics already some years ago, we asked EFSA to look at them if they're scientifically justified. And they identified some cases where they were not scientifically justified. One was Romania, and there we made commission decisions and we prohibited Romania to grant more emergency authorization of this kind. So that's done. Okay, then now we have the court case, which is legally binding for member states. I mean, in principle, there is no further action needed because the judgment is legally binding. Still, there have been some recent emergency authorizations, and there we have sent letters to the member states telling them, I mean, you should not do that. So we will see how they react now because these letters have been sent out recently. So, and what we are doing now, you mentioned the issue of research and the issue of justifications. That's why we want to amend the guidance document, because we want to make this stronger in the guidance document so that, I mean, member states need to justify better why they are granting emergency authorizations. So that is work in progress, which we are doing. And now a word on monitoring. I mean, when I mentioned monitoring, I meant keep an eye on, let's say, the emergency authorizations, but monitoring in general is important. And you said, why is it helping us? I just want to remind that, I mean, we have from the pesticide legislation point of view, there is already a legal requirement for all the professional users to keep records of what they use, where they use it, and in which concentrations. That's already in the legislation since many years. And they need to make available these records to the competent authorities if they ask for it. So, and what is new now is that in January, we have adopted an implementing regulation that these records are kept in an electronic format, which means that they would be it would be much more easy to, let's say, access this data on what pesticide is used in which field and which time. I mean, and this would feed into any monitoring program which would be, let's say, implemented at member state level, for instance. So, and it makes it also easier to provide the data to the competent authorities. So that is, let's say, a side information on monitoring more in general. And I think this gives a little bit of information. Thanks.
Who wants to answer the question regarding invasive species?
Yeah. So on that one, I hope we talk about the same one. This is the Asian hornet. My understanding is that this one is already listed under the invasive alien species regulation, and which means that member states are under the obligation to manage this particular species and eradicate it where possible. The fact that it's on the list doesn't mean that they can stop doing anything, of course. On the contrary, they need to manage, they need to eradicate. We know that the range of this one is expanding, and so that's causing problems and should be an incentive to work harder on that. The thing is, it's really for the member states now to act, and they can make use of EU funds, but they need to make it a priority under those EU funds. It's not that the money is simply out there. They need to make it a priority and then make use of that money. We are also doing a risk assessment of the Vespa mandarini at the moment, so that could or could not in the future become also one that is listed. And then on the other issue of the conflict between the beekeepers and the managers of protected areas, we're aware of that. We're aware of the existence of this issue. We so far don't think or don't know that it is a widespread problem. But we know that it is a problem in some places, and we have 2 Horizon projects that have just been launched that are looking into this. The idea of those projects is to build tools for the proper assessment of the capacity in a certain area for beekeeping, to avoid negative impacts on wildlife. So we're aware of it, we're looking into it, we're trying to be helpful where possible with Horizon at least.
It's an increasing problem.
And third question?
That was an answer to the third question also.
So you are satisfied with it? Yeah. Okay, so after having a look on the time, I want to give the opportunity when we now meet for a break, that you are also the opportunity to ask and raise questions. And I want to keep my closing remarks very short. I want to thank our host, BeLife, for setting up this morning discussion. I want to thank the panelists and the speakers for their contribution. And I want to leave you all with one question. Will all the guidelines, actions, measures, laws, directives, and initiatives be enough to stop the decline of pollinators? So this is rather matter for discussions we can continue now at the break. So thank you very much for attending this morning session, and thank you very much once again for your contributions.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.